All right, today I've got a John Deere. It's a 4310, and it's got a real common issue on a lot of these with these types of steering wheels. This is a quick adjust steering wheel. It comes pretty much standard, I think, on the 10 series, the 4010 series machines, and these are all pretty much in the same condition when you get these, or if you try to use these over the years. What happens is it's supposed to have a slide mechanism inside the steering column, and this slide mechanism, all it does is it lets the steering wheel pivot on a U-joint that's inside there, and that's not really a big deal. But where it becomes a problem is this little lever mechanism that's supposed to slide. Either the lever breaks, like this one here is broken, or it becomes seized, and it will be difficult to move up and down, and eventually this will probably break because somebody pulls on it too hard. And then once that happens, it's kind of stuck between settings, and it just flops around all over the place. And so people, they break these trying to adjust them, and then they just leave them and they drive them like this, which, you know, it's obviously not a very easy way to drive the machine when the steering wheel is going back and forth all the time. So what I'm going to do today is get into it and try to replace this handle and also unseize the slide mechanism inside here. This one is an e-power reverser, so it's got the column reverser on the steering area, so it's a little harder to get to underneath the dash. But I'm going to get into it and show you kind of how to do this, and hopefully we can get it all working again. Okay, this is the first step, is to take off. I like to take off all the plastic around the cowl area. So this is like the side piece on this side, and the other side there's a couple pieces in the center. You know, all that is really easy. It's just a bunch of bolts that hold the plastic in place, and some of the plastic is usually cracked, so you can fix that. I'm going to show how to fix that in a separate video, but this is kind of the second stage, or the first stage of trying to repair the broken steering column adjuster. So this step is actually relatively straightforward. The first thing you're going to do is separate, if you have the reverser on the steering column, is separate the plastic. There's two tabs that just pop right out. There's one on the left, one on the right. Once you do that, the two halves will separate just like that. And then you're left with the reverser, you know, still mounted with two bolts on the column. You're going to pull the two bolts on the reverser, and then you're just going to unplug it. There's a little connector here that plugs into this connector, the wiring harness on the tractor. Unplug all that, put that down, put it to the side. Then you'll still have your steering wheel in place. This is kind of the part where if you don't have the right puller for the steering wheel, this may or may not be a lengthy process for you. For me, it took me a little bit because I didn't want to just put a puller on the steering wheel and then damage the steering wheel, because it's all plastic. The way these are set up is there's a spline that's pressed into the bottom of the plastic steering wheel. So this is not really supposed to happen. You can see what happened here. The spline actually separated from the plastic steering wheel and was left on the shaft. So the shaft is really where the separation is supposed to happen. So I pulled this with a puller, and I saw the steering wheel starting to pull away from the spline, from the gear. And I said, you know what, it's not really a big deal, because believe it or not, when you go to put this all back together again, you're going to press this all together, and you're not even going to be able to tell that pulled away. It's not really going to make any difference. But technically that's not supposed to happen. This is where the separation should occur. So you see the small splines there, and then there's a bunch of small splines inside this guy. This should have stayed on the, you know, on the steering wheel and the plastic, and I wouldn't have saw any of this. However, not the end of the day, because like I said, you're going to press all this back together again when you put the nut back on the top of this shaft. So that is the hard part. If you don't pull that off, or you can't get the steering wheel off, then obviously you're going to have to get a puller. What I use is an automotive, I have an automotive ball joint front end set. And I use just a large puller. It's a jaw puller, and basically get that around the steering wheel best you can. And then you take your socket and just kind of turn it down slowly. You'll start to see it pull. If it pulls out correctly, it pops right off, and the whole thing comes out in about 5 minutes. If you pull it off incorrectly, like I did over here, and it separates, you'll just start to see it start to move, and you keep ratcheting it down, and eventually it'll move all the way off where you can slide it off the gear, and then you put your puller back on, same process, and you pull the gear off the steering column shaft, right? And then you're kind of done. You have to take this off because you won't be able to get the main piece off without doing that. So that's step one. Not too bad. I think the hardest part on this would be the puller for the steering wheel. If you can get a tractor steering wheel puller, that would make it a lot easier. However, you can do it with just a regular jaw, setup puller for like a front end set on a car or a truck, and you can pull it off no problem. Okay. All right, this is the next step. The real problem with these, and I think I mentioned this earlier, is that there's a handle in there. This handle has a hook on it and like a little pivot pin area. So the whole design on these is that the handle allows you to pull up on this slide here, and then this whole column, right, this shaft will pivot. There's like a U-joint, ball joint down in here more that allows it to do that. But what happens is these become stuck, they become rusted or just not used for a while. And then this up and down mechanism, the sleeve that's supposed to go up and down to let it pivot, is either hard to move or it's frozen. People come in and they take the handle, which is supposed to look like that, right? And they break the handle. Ends up looking pretty much like you look in there. There's a handle in there, but there's no mechanism to actually pivot or pull up and pivot on the shaft itself. So that there was the problem. I'm gonna go in here and try to free up the slides on the shaft to get that to work again, and then replace the handle inside this mechanism here. To pull the dash out, it's super easy. You're just gonna pull the plugs. There's a couple plugs, one on the left, one on the right. One on the left is for turn signals. One on the right is gonna be for, I believe, your lights. And then this is for your instrument, your cluster panel, these two harness connectors here. You pull all that out. It's real common to see stuff in here from mice or squirrels or whatever is outside. Honestly, usually it's a lot worse than this. This isn't too bad. I'll just go ahead and clean all this up. Take a shop vacuum and clean everything out. Suck all this dirt and any dust out of here, and you'll be good. And then I'm going to go ahead and replace the broken adjuster. And like I said, I'm gonna lubricate the fitting over here, and I'll show you all that once that's done, how that works. The other thing I can offer as a tip: you won't get this dash off, the cluster, the plastic part off, unless you slide off the throttle, the rubber piece on the throttle. That'll come right off. It's just pressed on there with these two little notches. So you take a rubber mallet and just tap up on it, it'll pop right off. And you don't want to start the machine until your throttle's back down if you're going to try to start it with everything off like this. So I'm gonna go ahead and fix everything now, and then I'll come back in a second. Okay, I was able to get to the broken parts on the steering column. So if you want to get into this, if you have to fix this, what you want to do, this little spring mechanism, is you push down, you turn it about a half a turn counterclockwise, and the whole spring's going to pop right out in your hand, right? It's just a plastic sleeve that engages and stays tight on the bottom here with the bottom piece. You pull that out, and then you're left with four bolts. And these are Allen bolts, right? Allen head. Take all four of those out, and you're gonna slide this whole thing, right off into your hands. And this is where all the problems typically are on these. You see how it's got some notches on either side. Well, that's all aluminum, and people tend to be rough on the steering wheel, and that breaks off those notches. Even more common is the side pieces. When you pull these off, you see this if I hold it on an angle. See how the side notches or the grooves where that top piece would slide into are just completely broken and gone. Both sides were like that, and the middle piece, this one here, is also in pretty bad shape. So I've got some parts that I'm going to order. I'm looking to order basically the two side pieces that are these guys here, and the middle piece, which is going to be this one here, which is going to rest, just like that. So you can kind of envision when this is on the tractor, this goes up and it's supposed to tilt, forward and backwards, and then fit into one of the notches, holding it in, one of the positions of, like, there's 5 or 6 different notches, so probably 5 or 6 different positions on the tilt steering wheel. on this machine. But yeah, so that's completely gone. Somebody had tried to put some screws, in there. They were self-tapping sheet metal screws just to keep it stationary versus letting it be adjustable. Obviously, that's not a good idea at all. I would not recommend that. When this goes, these are all aluminum, so obviously they go often probably. You just want to change out these 3 parts, and then you are going to be pretty much back to the way it was when you got it from the factory. So that's going to be it for today. I will order the parts, and then once they come in, I will pick up from here, and I will show you, how to put it back together and what it looks like and how it should operate when it's working properly. All right, I got the parts in, and I put the new parts on. It wasn't really that bad. There's that middle piece on top. There's the 2 side pieces on either side, and then I put the spring lock back on, which holds that spring in place. And that is pretty much it. You can take your hands, if you were to take them and pull up on this, and it would slide up, and you could go forward and back, and it would tilt just fine. So everything went back together really, really easily. And one tip I can offer on this, if you had to order parts and you wanted to pull the machine out and then pull something else in, or pull a vehicle in your garage, you can still do that. I put the reverser back on, and all you have to do is plug it back in, bolt it back on. The reverser is now back on there, so you can go forward, reverse, and then you just take the nut that's holding the steering wheel on, and you can put it back on, and take a wrench. I think this is a 15/16 size wrench, and then you can literally just drive the machine with the wrench, right? And so you can pull this out. You can kind of continue on with whatever you want to pull into this bay, so you're not taking up a bay for 2 or 3 days while the parts come in. That's one tip I can offer. And the next big step is going to be to put the dash back together. So I'm going to do that next, and then after that we'll put the side panels back on, and everything should come together. And at the end, I'll put the steering wheel back on. Okay, I was able to get the new handle on there with the dash. There was no issue. A lot of times you go online and you'll see people, they really struggle with trying to get this handle mechanism over the adjuster. And I've even seen the dealer try to do this and really struggle with it. But there's a couple tricks and a couple tips I can offer to get this on really easily. The first thing is you want to put the pivot all the way down on the steering column. So put it in the lowest position, and that gives you kind of the dash kind of all the way back away from the front of the machine more, if you will. And then also with the e-power reverser, take off the side bracket here for the reverser. There's actually a piece of metal that goes there. Show you. This piece here is the e-power reverser bracket, right? Usually sticks through that slot there. Usually you see it sticking through like right here. Take that right off, because that's going to be right in your way of where you need to get with this thing. So the first tip is tilt the wheel down, all the way down, before you put any of this on. Then you're going to take the dash and just gently kind of lower it over the top of the shaft. It'll be back here more because it'll be in the lower position. And then you're going to take your fingers underneath. You can feel the slide. You can feel the handle. And there's going to be two little holes on the bottom of this that go around the shaft that this pivots on. You're gonna take your hand underneath here and just pull that around the shaft area until it clicks into place. That's the first step. Now, once you got it clicked into place, you're not done, because the 2 hooks that actually lift up on the mechanism, the slide itself, this here. So there's these 2 little hooks that go around either side of this slide. And this is the other end of the plastic thing. There's 2 little hooks. Those will only engage if you lift up on the adjuster and actually adjust it, which, if you think about it, you can't do that until you get the adjusting handle in, right? So you have to lift up on this mechanism with another way, right? Which would be, I used a pry bar. Take a pry bar in there. I'm gonna show you what it looks like. I can tilt that back a little bit. See, that's the shaft you want to get on, right? So you're gonna take your hand, you're gonna kind of pull it wide, and you're gonna go around that shaft. It'll pop in there, but not all the way. That little white shaft is what I'm talking about, and the handle's around it already. And then once you get that done on both sides, you simply take a pry bar like this, and you're gonna come up underneath it, and you're gonna push up on that mechanism from underneath. This is pushing up on it as if you were adjusting it, and this will allow the slide to wrap around the handle area, the hook area, and then only then will it fully engage. Cause see, it has like these beveled edges on it, these little edges. That actually holds in the handle. It holds the handle in and it attaches it kind of to the mechanism. So now the handle's on the shaft, the first part you did, and the second part was to engage the hooks onto the slide mechanism, and that's what you're doing by manually, pushing up underneath it. When you push up on it, think of it as pushing up kind of, like this more. You're gonna actually have it just like that on the adjuster. You see how that is pushing up on it? You're gonna push up on it, it'll push it up and it'll pop right in on both sides, and then you engage these two hooks on either side of that plastic handle. And that is it. Like, that literally is a 5-minute or 10-minute job, right? And I've heard stories online where people can't get this on, and it's just because they don't understand that you have to actually adjust it to get it to click into place on the hooks on the handle. That's the part you'll never get that in if you try to force it. You have to pull it up and let it click in. Okay, my next step here is going to be to put everything else back together, and then that should be it. Okay, I've got everything back together again on this, and I think it went fairly well, I would say, on this repair. The biggest thing is the clicking in of the two hooks on the handle when you go to put it back together. If you are aware of that, that's probably the biggest thing. The rest of it's really straightforward and not a big deal. When I pulled off the steering wheel, it separated from the gear that's actually on the splines. So there's a spline gear that's pressed into the plastic part of the steering wheel. Mine actually separated. That's not a big deal. Like I said earlier, all I did was put that on the press. I pressed the gear back into the steering wheel before I put the steering wheel back on. You could do it several different ways. You could probably press it right on with the nut on the wheel. I didn't want to do that just because the plastic's kind of soft on the steering wheel. So I went ahead and just pressed it on there. That is not a big deal if you have a press. If you don't have a press, you could probably use a mallet with a socket behind it, and that would also push it back on. And then once you get the spline gear back into the steering wheel itself, it just goes back on in about a couple minutes. You're going to put the main nut back on and the cap. Put the cap on. The way I can show you how this is supposed to work. So this is really how it's supposed to work when you buy this machine brand new. You should take your thumb right here and take your finger behind it and put your finger like right where that adjuster is. You pull that forward and you can literally move this that easy. Like it shouldn't be any harder than that. Like people, when they go to adjust these wheels, it's a really odd handle the way they've designed it, and it's not very intuitive when you look at it, how you adjust it. But literally, if you do it like that, you'll never break that mechanism and you'll never have any issues. When you're on the machine, obviously this is much easier. I'm standing off the machine, one hand on a phone, one hand doing the adjustment, and it's still fairly straightforward for somebody to do this. That is how you adjust it. The other thing you never want to do on these is never use the steering wheel as a way to hoist your body up when you're on the seat. So don't wrench on the wheel on these at all. Like you really don't want to use the steering wheel as a way to hoist yourself on and off the tractor on this particular steering column. Just because if the steering column isn't clicked in all the way after you adjust it, or even if it's clicked in all the way, it's aluminum, don't forget, right? So those teeth in there can very easily strip. And that's really how the beginning of the problem is started, typically, as people try to use the steering wheel as a way to either get themselves off the machine or brace themselves while they're driving the machine. And that's just something you naturally try to do when you're on a machine. It's nothing wrong with that usually, but unfortunately with the way this steering wheel is designed with the aluminum teeth on the adjustment and the pivot points, it's just kind of a poor choice of metal, if you will, in there. And obviously aluminum doesn't rust, so that's why they use that, but also it's not that strong, right? So when it starts to break, it's just gonna need to be replaced. I would say total time on this project, if I didn't include the time to order the parts and wait for the parts, it was about 2 hours, and that was start to finish. Total cost on this was probably 150, somewhere in that range with all the parts. And I would say having this fixed on a machine like this, it really is kind of critical, because it's hard to operate a machine when the steering wheel is all over the place, and if it's at the wrong height as well, it's also difficult to operate. I always put a wheel spinner on my machines, just because if you've ever operated a machine like this for more than an hour, this is going to be something that's obviously super desirable, because you can maneuver in tight spots a lot easier, and it saves your arms from having to turn, with both arms, and it also lets you put your hand on the loader and the steering wheel really nice. And you want to keep this kind of where the forward and reverser is. If you got the reverser, if you got the hydrostatic, not a big deal. But if you're going to be going in reverse a lot, you want to have your hand near the reverser, right? You don't want to have it all the way over here on the other side, just to come all the way over here to put it in forward and reverse as you change directions. So try to keep your wheel spinner on the left side, especially if you've got the reverser on it, whether it's the electronic one like this one or it's the manual. It doesn't really matter. Obviously hydrostatic, you could put it on, more on top or on the other side. The whole design with these is that you can steer really quick and you can keep your other hand on the loader, right? And so if you think about that, that's kind of key when you're loading and moving. It's going to speed up the whole process. All right, and that's pretty much it. And hopefully this is helpful. If you have any questions on this job, just reach out on my channel.